Greetings, dear listeners. I welcome you to a tale of longing, loss, and fate. A tale that has captivated generations. This is the story of Rapunzel, a girl whose courage and love defied the darkness that bound her. Through trials of sorcery, sorrow, and sacrifice, her path was shaped by both despair and hope. Now, sit back, relax, breathe, and let us step into this magical world and hear her story unfold. Rapunzel, based on the original fairy tale collected by the brothers Grimm and adapted as a story to relax to and read by me, John Donaldson. Long ago, in a village at the edge of the deep forest, a husband and wife lived in quiet hope. For many years they had longed for a child, but their prayers remained unanswered. One day, however, their prayers were answered. The wife discovered she was expecting a baby. Joy flooded their lives, and they began to prepare for their long-awaited child with eager hearts. Their cottage, though simple, stood beside a high stone wall, beyond which lay a wondrous garden. Unlike any other, this garden was tended by an enchantress named Dame Gothel, a woman both feared and respected for her knowledge of magic. The garden thrived under her care, filled with flowers that never wilted, herbs with the power to heal, and plants so rare they could not be found anywhere else in the land. Her presence loomed like a shadow over the village. Many spoke in hushed tones of her powers, of how she could summon storms or heal wounds, but also how she could unleash terrible punishments on those who trespassed in her sacred garden. One warm spring afternoon, the wife, feeling weak and heavy with child, leaned out of her window to catch a cooling breeze. Her eyes fell upon a patch of rampion growing thick and green among the other plants. Something about its lush leaves and delicate pink blossoms called to her, whispering promises of relief. And in that instant, an insatiable craving overtook her. Each passing day she gazed longingly at the rampion. Her desire for the flower grew stronger, consuming her thoughts. Her condition worsened as the craving became unbearable. She became pale and weak, unable to eat or rest, and her husband, fearing for her life, begged to know what troubled her. With a sigh, she confessed her longing for the rampion from the enchantress's garden, whispering that she would surely die if she could not have it. Although her husband shuddered at the thought of trespassing into Dame Gothel's domain, he loved his wife deeply, and he could not bear to see her suffer. He resolved to risk everything for her sake. That night, as the village slept, he slipped out of the house. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow across the garden wall. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, seemed magnified in the stillness. With trembling hands he climbed the wall and dropped silently onto the soft earth below. The garden stretched before him, lush and fragrant. a paradise hidden from the world. He quickly gathered a handful of rampion and fled back over the wall, his heart pounding. His wife ate the rampion greedily, sighing in relief as strength returned to her arms and legs. But the craving did not go away. If anything, it grew stronger. The next evening she begged her husband to return for more. Trembling, he obeyed, stealing once again into the forbidden garden. On his second visit to the garden, fate was less kind. As he reached for the rampion, a shadow loomed over him. He turned to see Dame Gothel standing before him, her eyes gleaming like fire. She was both regal and terrifying, her presence commanding the very air around her. In a voice as cold as frost, she demanded to know why he had dared to steal from her sacred garden. The man fell to his knees and pleaded for mercy. He explained his wife's desperate longing and how he had only wished to save her life. The enchantress listened, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she made him an offer. He could take as much rampion as his wife desired, but in return he would have to give her the child his wife was carrying. The man's heart filled with horror, but under the weight of her piercing gaze, and paralyzed by fear, he found himself nodding in agreement. And so, when the baby was born, the enchantress appeared to claim her. The mother wept bitterly as Dame Gothel took the infant girl in her arms. The child's golden hair shimmered like sunlight, a sign of the magic that would shape her fate. Dame Gothel named her Rapunzel, which was another name for the rampion flower, and she carried her away to raise her in secret, leaving the grieving parents with empty arms and shattered hearts. Rapunzel grew into a child of breathtaking beauty, her golden locks cascading down her back like streams of molten gold. Her laughter, though rare, echoed with a purity that even birds paused to listen to. Yet, despite her loveliness, her life was one of loneliness. Dame Gothel shielded her from the world, fearing that others might try to take her away. When Rapunzel reached the age of 12, Dame Gothel decided to hide her completely and took her deep into the forest, where an isolated tower stood. Its walls were smooth and impenetrable, built of pale grey stone that had weathered the passage of time. The tower had no door, no staircase, only a single window high above, nearly lost among the sky and the treetops. From that day forward, Rapunzel lived alone in the tower, a prisoner, seeing no one but Dame Gothel. Whenever the enchantress wished to visit, she would stand at the base of the tower and call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair, that I may climb without a stair." Obediently, Rapunzel would loosen the long golden braid that she wound atop her head. Her hair, thick and strong, tumbled down the side of the tower like a golden rope. Dame Gothel would grasp it and climb, her weight pulling harshly on Rapunzel's head. The days in the tower were long and unchanging. Rapunzel spent her time weaving, singing, gazing out at the vast forest that stretched endlessly before her, and watching the birds that soared freely through the sky. She had never set foot beyond the walls that imprisoned her. The world was but a dream to her, something distant and unreachable. Sometimes she pressed her hands against the cold stone of the window frame, longing to feel the earth beneath her feet. Her voice, pure and haunting, became her solace. It carried through the forest, reaching the ears of those who wandered near. And always she wondered what lay beyond the trees. One day, as Rapunzel sang to herself, her voice as clear as birdsong drifted through the air. A prince, wandering through the woods, heard the melody and stopped his horse, enchanted by the sound. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, melancholy yet filled with hope. Drawn to the voice, he followed its path until he reached the tower. He searched for a door, but found none, only the high window from which the song floated down like a dream. Unable to find a way in, he left, but returned the next day, determined to solve the mystery. He waited, and this time his patience was rewarded. As twilight settled upon the forest, he heard Dame Gothel approach. Concealed among the trees, he watched as she called out the strange words, and to his amazement, a golden braid fell from above. The old woman climbed up swiftly and disappeared inside. The prince realized he had found the key to reaching the singer. The next morning, when Dame Gothel had gone, the prince approached the tower and called out in the same way. To his amazement, a moment later, the golden braid tumbled down. With a racing heart, he climbed, the rough strands slipping through his hands. Reaching the top, he swung himself into the chamber, and there before him stood Rapunzel. Startled, she stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. She had never seen a man before, but the prince spoke gently, telling her how her voice had guided him. He told her of the vast lands beyond the forest, of rivers and cities, of the sea that stretched beyond the horizon. Rapunzel, overwhelmed and awed, listened to his every word. Although she was frightened at first, she sensed no threat in him. His words were kind, and his eyes held wonder rather than malice. They spoke for hours, and as the days passed, he returned again and again, bringing tales and small gifts from the world she had never known. They grew closer, their conversations filled with dreams of freedom and adventure. In time, love blossomed between them. The prince asked Rapunzel to marry him, and she agreed with a heart full of hope. Together they devised a plan. Each time the prince visited, he would bring silk, and Rapunzel would weave it into a ladder. When it was finished, she would descend, escape the tower, and journey with him to his kingdom so they could be together forever. But fate had other plans. One day, as Dame Gothel was brushing Rapunzel's long hair, the girl, in a moment of innocent thought, asked why it was that climbing her hair was so much easier for the prince than for her. Dame Gothel froze, her fingers tightening in the golden strands. Slowly she turned to Rapunzel her expression darkening, and she demanded to know the truth. A terrible realization dawned upon Rapunzel, and realizing her mistake, confessed everything. In a furious rage, Dame Gothel took a pair of large scissors, and with a single motion cut Rapunzel's golden braid, and threw it to the ground, and banished the girl to a desolate wasteland far away, where she would know only hardship and sorrow. That night, when the prince arrived and called out, Dame Gothel let down the severed braid. As he climbed, he found himself face to face, not with Rapunzel, but with the enchantress. With cruel words, Dame Gothel told the prince that he would never see Rapunzel again. In despair, he leapt from the tower. Though he survived the fall, he tumbled into the thorns below. The branches tore at his skin, their cruel thorns piercing his eyes. Blind and broken, he wandered through the forest, guided only by the memory of Rapunzel's voice. But fate had not yet abandoned them. The prince wandered through the endless forest, his world shrouded in darkness. Day after day he stumbled over roots and rocks, his hands outstretched to feel his way forward. He had no sense of direction, no sight of the sun to guide him. His clothes were torn, his face marked with old wounds, and hunger gnawed at him. But despite his suffering, he never stopped calling out for Rapunzel, whispering her name into the wind, hoping that fate would be kind. Meanwhile, far away, Rapunzel wept in exile. Seasons passed. He drank from streams and lived off berries, his strength and his hope getting weaker and weaker. Yet something deep within him, perhaps love, perhaps destiny, pushed him forward. Then, one day, as he wandered blindly through a quiet meadow, he heard something that made his heart stop. A voice, soft and sweet, singing a sweet but sad melody. The same voice that had once called to him from the tower. His breath caught in his throat. With unsteady steps he followed the sound, stumbling forward, guided by nothing but the music of her voice. Then, suddenly, he felt hands grasp his own, gentle, warm, and familiar. He whispered her name, his voice breaking. She gasped, tears welling in her eyes, as she finally looked at the man she had never stopped loving. She pulled him close, her sobbing shaking her small frame, and as she held him, her tears, heavy with sorrow and joy, fell onto his cheeks. A strange warmth spread across his skin. The moment her tears touched his closed eyes, a sudden light pierced through the darkness. A flicker of vision returned. Then, slowly, the blurred shapes sharpened, and at last he could see her, clear as a summer's day. Rapunzel, her golden hair kept short, but still shining like sunlight, stood before him, her face radiant with love. Overcome with joy, he held her tightly, promising never to lose her again. And so, hand in hand, they left the wilderness behind. The prince took Rapunzel to his kingdom, where the people rejoiced at seeing their long-lost prince return home, and Rapunzel was welcomed too with open arms. Soon after, They were married in a grand celebration, and their love, forged through trials and loss, became the foundation of a long and happy life. And never again did a tower or an evil old enchantress stand between them. Dame Gothel was never seen again, her power lost to time. But Rapunzel and her prince lived a long life of happiness and peace. The end. And so, dear listeners, ends the tale of Rapunzel, a story of longing, fate, and love's unbreakable bond. May it remind us that even in the deepest sorrow, hope may yet find a way. Thank you for listening, and may your own journeys be filled with light.